My name is Hannah Whitaker. I was 36 years old, a divorce recovery counselor in Nashville, Tennessee, when my parents put my private divorce story into the sponsor packet for their marriage retreat and called me a warning and a redemption. That was the polished version. The uglier version had started years earlier at a church couples dinner when my mother looked at my empty ring finger in front of 3 tables of people and said, "That is what happens when a woman stops listening." The room did not laugh loudly. Church people rarely laugh loudly at cruelty. They smile, look down, and let the speaker decide whether it was a joke. My father, Pastor Thomas Whitaker, sat beside her and did nothing. That was his gift. He could make silence feel holy. My mother, Marlene Whitaker, ran the women's ministry like a soft courtroom. My younger sister Bethany was the good daughter, the faithful wife, the woman invited onto panels about biblical marriage and graceful submission. I was the divorced daughter, the cautionary story, the one who had left a controlling husband and somehow became more embarrassing to my parents than the man who locked me out of my own home. Before I tell you how my cracked silver wedding ring box ended up on a church boardroom table while my mother whispered, "Don't. Tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before I tell you what kind of family calls your pain useful only after it can raise money. Because my divorce was not their sermon illustration. It was the night I survived. When I left my husband, I did not leave with a dramatic speech or a suitcase full of perfectly folded clothes. I left after he changed the deadbolt while I was at work and put my things in black trash bags under the carport because I had stopped asking permission to have my own bank account. I was 29, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called my parents first because I was still foolish enough to believe that the pastor's house would be safer than the marriage I had escaped. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "I need somewhere to stay for a week." I could hear dishes clinking in the background. She lowered her voice and said, "Hannah, your father has counseling appointments tonight. We cannot bring marital shame into the parsonage." Marital shame. Not fear, not safety. Shame. My father called an hour later and said, "Have you tried being gentler?" That question closed a door inside me. My Aunt June opened the real one. She was my father's older sister, a retired elementary school librarian with a little brick house, a guest room full of quilts, and a backbone my father had always called difficult. When I arrived at her place with a grocery bag of clothes and the cracked silver ring box in my purse, she did not ask what I had done wrong. She made tea, put clean sheets on the bed, and said, "A private wound is not public property." That sentence became the first boundary I ever believed. My childhood had trained me to think otherwise. Being Pastor Whitaker's daughter meant every feeling had an audience and every mistake had a moral. If Bethany cried during youth choir, she was tender-hearted. If I cried, my mother called it attention-seeking. If Bethany forgot a verse, people laughed. If I forgot one, my father said, "Hannah, people watch our family." People watching was the invisible guest at every meal. My mother corrected my posture in front of women's Bible study. My father used my teenage heartbreak as a 5-minute lesson on guarding the heart. I learned early that my pain did not belong to me if it could make my parents sound wise. Bethany learned something different. She learned how to be displayed. She was obedient, pretty, married young, and able to speak in soft phrases that made older women nod. Her marriage to Caleb became a ministry asset before it became a life. She and Caleb sat on the faithful marriage panel every spring, smiling under warm lights while my mother introduced them as proof that covenant still works when young people honor counsel. I loved my sister, but I understood the family map. Bethany was the proof. I was the warning. The first public cut after my divorce came at the church couples dinner 6 months after I left my husband. I had only attended because my father said it would help people see I was not running from fellowship. The fellowship hall smelled like baked chicken, coffee, and carpet cleaner. Bethany and Caleb sat near the front with little cards labeled panel couple. I was asked to help with registration, though my parents had invited me as family. My mother watched me hand out name tags, then touched my bare ring finger as if checking a bruise. "Your divorce can still serve God, Hannah," she said, loud enough for a woman behind me to hear. "Even if your marriage didn't." That sentence slid through the room like a cold draft. My father looked at his notes. Bethany's face tightened, but she stayed seated. I smiled because women in churches like ours learn that if you flinch, the flinch becomes the sin. Later that night, I sat in Aunt June's guest room with the cracked ring box in my lap and tried to decide whether to throw it away. Aunt June knocked once and came in holding 2 mugs of peppermint tea. She saw the box and sat beside me. "Keep it," she said. "Not for him. For the day someone tries to tell this story without you." I thought she was being dramatic. She was being accurate. Over the next 2 years, I rebuilt, slowly, not beautifully, slowly. I worked part-time at a women's legal clinic, filing intake forms and sitting beside women who whispered because fear had taught them volume was dangerous. I learned about protective orders, lease transfers, credit freezes, emergency housing, custody questions, safety plans, and the strange shame women carry when they survive something other people wanted them to endure politely. At first, I answered phones. Then I helped design a divorce recovery curriculum focused on documents, housing, money, identity, and emotional control. The clinic director, Naomi Price, told me, "Healing without paperwork can still leave a woman trapped." That sentence fit beside Aunt June's. My cracked ring box stopped being only a symbol of failure. It became the object I placed on the table during workshops when I told women, "You decide who gets to hear what happened." The first time a woman in my group said, "I did not know I was allowed to keep parts private," I felt something inside me shift. Pain became purpose, one protected document at a time. My parents noticed my work only after other people did. The program grew. A local nonprofit partnered with us. Then a regional women's resource network gave us an award for helping women rebuild after separation through legal access, housing support, and financial documentation. The article mentioned my name, my profession, and one careful sentence about my own divorce shaping the work. I had approved that sentence myself. Consent changes the weight of a story. 3 days after the article ran, my mother emailed me. Subject line, "Proud of you." There was no apology inside. There never was. She wrote, "Your father and I always knew God would redeem your painful season. This year's marriage retreat is focused on restoration, and we would love for you to share your testimony as part of the weekend. It could help so many women." My father sent a separate text. This could bring healing full circle. Full circle meant back under their roof, back under their microphone, back inside a version of my life where they got to interpret the wound. Bethany texted later that night, "I think Mom already put you in the packet. I'm sorry." She attached a PDF. My hands went cold before I reached the 3rd page. The sponsor deck had a burgundy cover, gold letters, and a photo of my parents holding hands under a retreat banner. Page 6 was titled, "Our Daughter's Divorce, a Warning and a Redemption." My name was there. Hannah Whitaker, Divorce Recovery Counselor. My award was there. My program language was copied almost word for word. Worse, a private letter I had written my father during the worst month of my divorce had been quoted in a section about the cost of rejecting wise counsel. I had written that letter from Aunt June's kitchen table at 2 a.m. "Please don't make my divorce a sermon before I know how to survive it." He had never answered it. Now the sentence sat in a sponsor packet as proof of retreat urgency. They wanted my testimony, not my healing. I did not call my parents. I audited first. Retreat website draft, sponsor packet, church board emails, sermon archive, old counseling emails, my nonprofit award bio, registration brochure, a donor slide using my program name. One email from my mother said, "Hannah may resist at first, but women respond powerfully when pain is framed with obedience and restoration." Another from my father said, "We should position her as redeemed, not rebellious." Position her. Like a chair on a stage. Like a lesson in a sermon. Like a daughter they could move after years of not sheltering her. My name had been added to the retreat as Recovery Advisor. I had never agreed. My program had been listed as a resource partner. Naomi had never agreed. My story had been packaged as sponsor bait, and my parents had expected me to object quietly enough for them to manage. That was their mistake. I sent one formal non-consent letter to the retreat sponsors, the church elder board, and the donor liaison. I stated that my name, divorce story, award, professional program language, private letter, and client resources had been used without my permission. I requested immediate removal, correction of sponsor materials, and written confirmation that no funding had been solicited using my unauthorized testimony. One letter, one boundary, one cracked box opened. My mother called at 11:17 p.m. I answered because Naomi sat across from me with the sponsor packet printed in front of her, and Aunt June was on speaker from her living room with her own folder of old notes. "Why would you contact the sponsors?" my mother asked. "Because you used my story. We were trying to help women. Did I consent?" "Hannah, don't talk like a lawyer to your mother." "Did I consent?" My father came on the line. "This is not how believers handle conflict. You put my divorce in a sponsor packet." My mother's voice sharpened. "Donors were promised your testimony." There it was. Not "we hurt you," not "we should have asked." Donors were promised. Panic makes the hidden sentence careless. I said, "Then correct the promise." She lowered her voice. "If you damage this retreat, you hurt women who need help." That line hit where she aimed it. I thought of the women who would attend because they were lonely, scared, trying to save marriages, or trying to understand whether leaving danger made them faithless. My mother knew I cared about them. She was not appealing to love. She was hiding behind the vulnerable. Aunt June spoke from the phone. "Marlene, women are not shields." Silence. Then my mother said, "June, you always encouraged Hannah's rebellion." Aunt June answered, "No, I gave her a bed when you gave her a lesson." My father said, "This is exactly the bitterness we're concerned about." "No," I said, "this is consent." They hung up first. That was fine. The call had already confessed enough. The smear began the next morning as a prayer request. My mother sent it to the women's ministry list. Then it spread through texts and forwarded screenshots. "Please pray for a spirit of unity around this year's retreat. The enemy often attacks marriage ministry through wounded people who have not fully surrendered their pain." She did not name me. She did not need to. Church women are fluent in unnamed accusations. By noon, 3 people had messaged me with soft warnings about unforgiveness. One wrote, "Sometimes God uses our shame to save others." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Shame is what controlling people call your pain when they want permission to handle it. My father preached that Sunday about testimony, though he avoided my name. He said, "A story is never wasted when surrendered to God." Surrendered. Not stolen, not copied, not pitched to donors. Surrendered. I sat at home and watched the live stream for 17 minutes before closing my laptop. Public men love holy language because it makes consent sound selfish. I offered structured mercy because the retreat did serve women, even if my parents had twisted it. My letter gave the church 72 hours to remove my name, delete my private story from all materials, correct sponsor packets, cancel my listed session, remove my program language, and adopt a written testimony consent policy before the event. I did not demand the retreat shut down. I demanded it stop using pain without permission. My father replied, "After all this church has invested in you, this is a painful way to give back." Give back meant surrender the wound. Invested meant ownership. Painful meant power had met a locked door. Bethany asked to meet me at the legal clinic before the elder review. She arrived wearing a beige coat and no makeup, which told me she had not come to perform. Caleb waited outside in the hallway with a folder. Bethany sat across from me and stared at the cracked ring box on my desk. "I should have said something years ago," she said. "About what?" I asked, because vague guilt is another way people avoid facts. She swallowed. "About the dinners, the panels, the way Mom used you." Caleb came in then and placed the folder on the table. "I forwarded you the sponsor deck," he said. "But there's more." Inside were planning emails, retreat outlines, and a panel script. Bethany and Caleb had been listed for a session called Faithful Marriage in a Confused World. My segment was listed 2 hours later as When Counsel is Rejected, A Daughter's Journey Back. Back. The word made me almost laugh. I had not gone back. I had gotten free. Caleb said quietly, "Your letter to your dad was copied into the first draft. I told Thomas it felt wrong. He said family stories belong to family ministry. Family stories belong to the person who survived them." Bethany cried then. "I liked being the good daughter," she said. "It made me feel safe." That was the first honest thing she had ever said about our family map. I did not comfort her, but I did not punish her for finally naming it. Some golden children are not villains. They are beneficiaries who wake up late and have to decide whether comfort is worth the lie. The private truth room happened in the clinic conference room 2 days before the board review. The room had a long laminate table, a box of tissues, a whiteboard full of housing deadlines, and a locked cabinet where we kept emergency document copies for women leaving unsafe homes. I placed the cracked silver ring box on the table before anyone arrived. It looked small, almost harmless. That was the thing about objects. They did not have to be large to hold a whole life. My parents arrived together. My father wore his pastor suit. My mother wore pearls and the lavender scarf she used whenever she wanted to look wounded but composed. Bethany sat beside Caleb across from them, not beside them. Naomi leaned against the cabinet. Aunt June sat at the end of the table with a folder on her lap and a look that told me she had been waiting years for this room. My father opened with calm. "Hannah, we want restoration, not conflict." "Then start with correction," I said. My mother looked at the ring box. "Was that necessary?" "You used my divorce," I said. "This was part of it." Granting someone access to your pain should never be assumed because they recognize the object. My father folded his hands. "Your story can help people. My consent can too." My mother sighed. "You are making this legalistic." Naomi spoke for the first time. "Consent is not legalism. It is ethics." My mother ignored her. She turned to me. "You are so guarded now." "I was locked out," I said. "Guarded was growth." Aunt June opened her folder and slid a paper across the table. It was my old letter, the one I wrote from her kitchen. My father's mouth tightened. "Where did you get that?" Aunt June said, "From Hannah, after you returned it." My mother looked startled. "We did not return it." Aunt June slid the envelope forward. "Return to sender" was stamped across the front in blue ink. My father looked away. That was the first proof reversal. They said I refused healing. The envelope showed they refused my pain before it became useful. Aunt June read one line. "Please don't make my divorce a sermon before I know how to survive it." The room went still. Bethany covered her mouth. Caleb looked down. My mother whispered, "That was a long time ago." I placed the sponsor slide beside the letter. Same phrase, same pain, new audience. Then why is it in this packet? That was the second reversal. Old abandonment had become current fundraising. My father said, the language was adapted. From a private letter. For ministry. For sponsors. His face hardened. "You are determined to see the worst in us." I opened the retreat deck to my listed session and my program language. "You listed me as recovery advisor. We hoped you would come around. Hope is not permission." My mother leaned forward. "You have no husband, no children, and a platform built from pain. Why would you not pour that into the church that raised you? There it was, the single woman tax, dressed for Sunday. Because I was divorced and childless, my story was considered unused ministry inventory. I said, "My life is not extra material." My father's voice lowered. "Do not embarrass this church." Aunt June replied, "The church should be more embarrassed by what it tried to use." My mother's eyes filled. "You would harm marriages to punish us?" "No," I said. "I am protecting women from a ministry that treats private pain as a resource." Naomi placed a statement from a former retreat attendee on the table. Her name was Naomi too, which had confused us at first, so I will call her Naomi Bell. She had written that during a previous retreat, my mother pressured women in a breakout session to disclose marital struggles because silence keeps shame alive. Naomi Bell had shared more than she wanted, then regretted it for months. "Consent patterns matter," my clinic director said. That was the third reversal. This was not only my story, it was a method. My father stood. "This meeting is over." I touched the ring box. "The review is tomorrow." My mother whispered, "Don't bring that letter." Not "don't use women." Not "don't hurt people." Don't bring proof. The elder board and sponsor review took place in a church conference room, with stained glass light falling across a table full of bottled water and untouched cookies. On the wall hung a framed verse about truth spoken in love. That felt appropriate, though probably not in the way my father intended. Present were 3 elders, the main retreat sponsor, a donor liaison, my parents, Bethany, Caleb, Aunt June, Naomi Price from my clinic, Naomi Bell as a former attendee, and me. My father sat at the head of the table because habit is hard to break. The senior elder gently asked him to move to the side. That was the first room shift. Small, but visible. My mother noticed. So did I. My father spoke first. "This matter has been painful for our family," he said. "Hannah has done meaningful work after her divorce, and we hope to show how God redeems brokenness. Unfortunately, she has interpreted our intentions as exploitation." Intentions, the favorite hiding place of people caught by impact. My mother added, "We have only ever wanted her story to help others." The sponsor nodded slightly. I waited. Let them speak first. Pride often carries its own evidence. When the elder turned to me, I placed the sponsor packet on the table. "My objection is not to women receiving support," I said. "My objection is to my name, private divorce details, professional program, and personal letter being used without consent to secure retreat sponsorship." I showed the slide. Our daughter's divorce, a warning and a redemption. The sponsor's face changed. My father looked at the table. My mother whispered, "That was a working title." "It was sent to sponsors," I said. The donor liaison checked her copy and nodded. The room shifted again. Working title became public evidence. I placed my non-consent letter beside the deck. Then the retreat website draft. Then the program language copied from my clinic curriculum. Naomi Price explained calmly that our clinic had not partnered with the retreat and had never authorized use of our materials. My father said, "The concepts are common." Naomi answered, "The sentences are not." A sponsor flipped through the packet. Paper sounds louder when trust starts falling apart. Then Aunt June placed my returned letter in front of the elders. "This is the letter Hannah wrote when she was newly separated and unsafe," she said. She asked her father not to preach about her divorce before she knew how to survive it. My mother closed her eyes. Aunt June read the line again. "Please don't make my divorce a sermon before I know how to survive it." The senior elder looked at my father. "Did you respond to this letter?" My father did not answer immediately. Silence became testimony. He finally said, "I believed distance would allow emotions to settle." Aunt June said, "You returned it unopened." That was the 4th reversal. My father's pastoral concern met the envelope he had rejected. Naomi Bell then spoke. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She said Marlene's retreat session the previous year had pressured women to share painful marital details in small groups without clear consent or privacy boundaries. "I told more than I wanted," she said. "When I cried afterward, Mrs. Whitaker told me God cannot heal what women hide." My mother said, "That is not fair." Naomi Bell replied, "It is what you said." The sponsor closed her folder. The elder beside her removed his glasses. The room had stopped being about one angry daughter. It had become about a ministry culture. That frightened my mother more than any insult could have. Bethany spoke next. My mother said her name once, warning and pleading mixed together. Bethany did not stop. "I was treated as proof the teaching worked," she said. "Hannah was treated as proof of what happens if it doesn't. That was not fair, and I will not sit on the marriage panel this year." Caleb added, "I forwarded the sponsor deck because it used Hannah's story before she agreed." My father's jaw tightened. The golden daughter had moved out of the display case. The senior elder asked my mother whether she had written the prayer request about wounded people attacking marriage ministry. She said, "I did not name Hannah." Naomi Price said, "That is not the same as not identifying her." The sponsor then asked the clearest question in the room. "How many testimonies in this retreat have documented consent?" My father began to answer with philosophy. The elder interrupted. "Documented consent, Thomas." My father had no number. That was the fifth reversal. A ministry built on testimonies had not protected the people inside them. The board took a short break. My mother approached me near the window while everyone else spoke in low voices. She kept her smile small in case anyone looked. "Please don't destroy your father," she whispered. I looked at the cracked ring box in my hand. "You built this on stories you didn't own. We are your family." "Then you should have asked first." Her eyes hardened. "You are still so wounded." "Yes," I said, "and still in charge of my wound." After the break, the decision came without shouting. The main sponsor withdrew funding from that year's retreat, pending a consent and privacy review. The elders postponed the event, removed my name and materials, and required written consent policies for any testimony, story, counseling example, or private family reference used in teaching or fundraising. My mother's Women Restoring Families Award was withdrawn. My father was placed under elder review for misuse of pastoral authority and family information. Bethany's panel was canceled after she refused to participate. Naomi Bell was invited to help draft privacy guidelines for future support groups. The consequences fit the sin. They had used consent language falsely, so consent became the line they could not cross. The fallout moved through the church slowly, not like scandal fireworks, like doors closing in a hallway. Women asked for copies of the new privacy policy. 2 former attendees contacted Naomi Price's clinic because they realized they had disclosed private information under pressure. A sponsor shifted funding to direct legal support for women leaving unsafe marriages. My father took a 3-month leave from counseling duties. My mother resigned from leading the retreat for a season, which was church language for the room had changed and she could not control it. Some people said I had gone too far. They always do when the person who stayed quiet finally uses documents. Others sent me messages they had been holding for years. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who felt displayed." That sentence mattered more than any apology my parents never gave. My father sent one email after the review. "I hope someday you can see our hearts." I did not respond. Hearts do not erase packets. My mother left a voicemail saying she had only wanted my pain to matter. I deleted it after saving the transcript. My pain had always mattered. It just did not belong to her. Aunt June died 8 months later, quietly, in her sleep, with 3 library books on her nightstand and a half-finished crossword beside her bed. In her will, she left me a small trust and the locked folder where she had kept my letter, the returned envelope, early clinic notes, and a copy of the first workshop handout where I had used the cracked ring box. I cried harder than I expected when I saw her handwriting on the file tab. Hannah's story, hers to tell. That was love with correct ownership. With Naomi Price and 2 former clients, including Naomi Bell, I created the Silver Box Privacy Fund. It helps women leaving controlling marriages protect their legal records, housing documents, bank information, personal letters, therapy notes, and testimony consent. We teach workshops in legal clinics, community centers, and sometimes churches that are willing to learn before they speak. At the front of every workshop, I place the cracked silver ring box on the table. Not because divorce is failure, because the box reminds me that something broken can still hold ownership. At our first workshop, a woman in a gray sweater asked, "What if my family says sharing my story will help others?" I told her, "Helping others should not require losing yourself again." She wrote that down. Another woman asked if she could refuse to let a church use her testimony after she had shared it once in a small group. Naomi Bell answered, "Yes, consent is not a lifetime donation." That became one of our printed lines. Consent matters even when the story sounds holy. My parents still run smaller marriage classes. They use less of other people now, at least publicly. Bethany and I are not perfectly close, but we are honest in a way we never were before. She once told me, "I liked being proof because it meant I wasn't the warning." I told her, "I know." That was not forgiveness. It was truth without performance. I still keep the cracked ring box on my desk. Sometimes women ask if it hurts to look at it. I tell them no, not anymore. The box no longer belongs to the marriage that ended. It belongs to the woman who learned that survival does not have to become someone else's content. I remember the parsonage door that did not open. I remember Aunt June's spare bed. I remember the fellowship hall, my mother's voice, my father's silence, Bethany under the panel lights. I remember writing, "Please don't make my divorce a sermon before I know how to survive it." I remember the day I realized I had survived anyway. A private wound is not public property. My divorce was not their sermon illustration. A family that calls your pain useful while ignoring your consent does not want healing. It wants ownership. If your family used your worst season to make themselves look wise, would you call that love or branding? And if the box that once held a broken ring became the place where you kept your own story, would you hand it back to the people who sold it? Or would you finally lock it and keep the key?